Let's continue our lesson on the decision-making process. So, what are the steps in decision-making process? Rational decision-making, according to David Holt, is a process involving the following steps. Number one, diagnose a problem. You analyze the environment. Next is develop viable alternatives. Evaluate alternatives. Make a choice among the alternatives presented. Implement a decision, and evaluate and adapt decision results. So let's take a look at the first one, diagnose a problem. So if a manager wants to make an intelligent decision, the first move is to identify a problem. If the manager fails to identify the actual problem, it is impossible to succeed in the subsequent steps. An expert once said that identification of the problem is tantamount to having the problem half solved. So what is a problem? A problem exists when there is a difference between an actual situation and a desired situation. Now, identification of a problem is important in decision making because if you fail to understand the problem or identify what the problem is, the solution or the decision that you're going to make may not be effective or will not may not be addressing the correct problem. The environment where the organization is situated plays a very significant role in the success or failure of the organization. So it is therefore very important that analysis of the environment is undertaken. The objective of the environmental analysis is to identify the constraints, whether it's internal or external, and considering the internal and external components of the environment, where internal components are the activities within the firm, and the external uh, components are the variables outside the organization. The next slide will show these constraints and these components. So we have the internal environment. The internal environment are the organizational activities. So you have the aspects, organizational aspects like the structure, policies within the organization, the rules, the ability of management, marketing aspects, personnel, recruitment, incentive systems, financial aspects. All this will play an important role in decision making. For example, you cannot make a decision on things if you don't have the financial capacity. For example, buy additional machineries or hire more people if you don't have the financial capacity to do that. So those will affect your decision. The external environment are those outside the organization. For example, your suppliers, you want to increase your production, but your suppliers cannot give you the required raw materials, so that's out of your control. The banks, for example, you don't have the financial capacity, so you want to borrow from the bank, but uh, the bank imposed very stiff interest rates, so that's going to be an issue that will factor on your decision on how to proceed. Your competitors, government regulations, government policies, for example. So these things will play an important role in your decision making. So it's important to analyze the internal and external environment before making a decision. Next is develop viable alternatives. So most of the time, problems may be solved by any of the solutions offered. When faced with a problem, you do not come up with a single solution. You have to come up with a list of alternative solutions. What are the possible solutions that you can employ or you can use to solve the problem? So the best among these alternative solutions will be or must be considered by the management. So the steps that we can use to develop viable alternatives, one is you prepare a list of alternative solutions. What are the possible solutions that you can use to solve the problem? Then each of the item you determine its viability, which one you can actually use, what will be how effective is it going to be, how what will be the resources needed for each one, how costly is each solution will be. So you're going to determine the viability of each solution. Then you can always revise this list by removing those you feel that are not viable. So an example is the problem is increasing the firm's output by 30%. You need to increase your output by 30% because your client, for example, requires more of your product. So you have to increase your output by 30%. So how are you going to solve this one? So these are the alternative solutions. You had a meeting and then you come up with these alternative solutions. One is improve capacity by hiring more workers. Second, improve capacity by building additional facilities. Three, secure services of subcontractors. You can do that. Number four, buy needed additional outputs from other firms. So instead of producing it yourself, you buy from other firms. Number five, you stop serving one of the company's customers or some of the company's customers. So to address the demand by one of your clients, asks for which requires you to have 30% more of your output, you will stop serving some of your company's customers. So instead of giving it to this customer, you are going to reroute it to another customer which requires your 30%. Or you delay servicing some of your clients. You prioritize this one client who requires 30% more, and you delay servicing some other clients until you fulfill the 30% demand of one client. So for task number two, which of these offered solutions will you keep and which ones are you going to remove? Remember that you have the list, you examine the viability, and you revise the list by removing those you feel or you think are not viable. So in week one discussion board under question two, you state which of these items you think are viable and you justify why you think the items you decided to remove were not viable. So you have to justify your decision. Why did you remove these uh, alternatives? So post your answers in week one discussion board under question number two. After determining the viability of the alternatives and the list has been revised, evaluation of the remaining alternatives is important because the next step involves making a choice. So if you were able to properly evaluate the list or the alternatives that you have on your list, then this makes choosing the right solution less difficult. So each alternative must be analyzed and evaluated in terms of three factors. So you have the value, This refers to the benefits that we can expect from implementing this uh, alternative. Say, for example, you expect to have a net profit of 10 million per year if this alternative is chosen compared to this other alternative. Another factor is the cost. You have out-of-pocket costs, opportunity costs, and the follow-on costs. So, for example, uh, an alternative is to construct a facility. So, out-of-pocket cost will be 100 million. So, if an alternative is to construct a facility that will cost you 100 million out of your pocket. Another cost is opportunity cost. So, instead of constructing 100 million for a facility, if you're going to invest that 100 million somewhere, you could be earning 2 million per year. However, so you lost that opportunity. So that opportunity cost is 2 million per year because you are going to construct a facility for 100 million. And if that 100 million will be invested somewhere, you could be earning 2 million per year. So that's an opportunity cost or lost opportunity to earn. Another cost is a follow-on cost. It's a continuing cost. For example, maintenance of that 100 million peso facility that you constructed. So you will be spending 3 million per year for maintenance of that facility. So that's added cost. Another factor is the risk characteristics. So the likelihood of achieving the goals if this particular alternative is chosen. So if the probability of net profit of 10 million is only 10%, then compared to others which will have a bigger probability of, say for example, 5 million profit per year, but the probability of earning that is 80%. So which one will you choose? The one will the one that will give you a net profit of 10 million at 10% probability, or 5 million profit but at 80% probability of success. So that's how you're going to uh, evaluate your alternatives. So let's look at this example. So the problem you are facing as a manager is choosing between three applicants for one vacancy for junior engineer. So you are assigned to hire them. So the engineer manager assigned will have to come up with a criteria to evaluate the applicants. So what will be the criteria? So you're going to look at education. Do they have the bachelor's degree required? The master's degree, it's an addition. Do they have appropriate training? Do they have the experience? And what are their age? So each of these will be given equivalent points. And then the higher higher the points, then the more suited that candidate will be to the vacancy that you have. So every time you make a decision, you have to come up with a criteria, be it in engineering management or doing your thesis or research later on. Number five is making a choice. So after evaluating the alternatives, you as a decision maker, as an engineer manager, must be ready to make a choice. This is the point where you have to convince, or you must be convinced that all the previous steps from 1 to 4 have been correctly done. So choice making is a process of selecting among alternatives representing potential solutions to a problem. A particular effort should be made to identify all significant consequences of each choice. So as we have mentioned in the previous slide, you have the value, the cost, and the risk characteristics. So to make the selection process easier, the alternatives could be ranked from best to worst based on factors. So factors like the benefit or the value, the cost, and risk. After a decision has been made, implementation follows. This is important. It's important to implement the decision, or else the decision making process that you have uh, undergone or completed will be all for nothing. Implementation refers to carrying out the decision so that the objectives of the organization will be achieved. And to make the implementation effective, a plan must be devised. So at this stage, during the implementation stage, resources must be allocated, be it facilities, um, raw materials, or machines, or even human resource should be made available for this uh, solution. And those who are involved in implementation must understand and accept the solution for it to be effective and successful. So the last step is evaluate and adapt the decision results. So in implementing the decision, the expected results may or may not happen. So it is therefore important for the manager to use uh, control and feedback mechanisms to ensure results and provide information for future uh, decisions. So control refers to the actions made to ensure that activities performed match the desired activities or goals. And the second part of that mechanism is feedback. So this refers to the process which requires checking at each stage of the process to ensure that the alternatives generated and the solutions selected are in keeping with the goals and objectives. In this last stage of the decision making process, the engineer manager will find out whether or not the desired results are achieved. If the desired results are achieved, then you can assume that the decision made was good. If it was not achieved, it does not automatically mean that uh, the decision is bad, but it is suggested that further analysis of the decision is necessary. So, and to analyze that, you need the different approaches in problem solving, the qualitative and the quantitative uh, approaches.